Of all the names of God, Baal is the most feared. Baal is the greatest link in the chain for the eternal and universal empire that has shackled humanity for thousands of years.
But like, we're literally showing you like, no, this is the blackest of all magic that's being used against you, and we're trying to give you the tools to defeat it.
Imagine a puzzle with 10,000 pieces, and a lot of them fit with multiple other pieces, not just one other piece, and half the pieces are irretrievably lost. So you're trying to put a picture together out of these fragments, and you're also under the threat of being fired, possibly jailed, maybe yeeted out of existence completely.
This is the feudalism. The Pope cannot be judged by any human authority, only by God. You can literally go online and search the current Pope and find him at a fucking ball game like every other American asshole. And you're gonna tell me he's the vicar to Christ? This is the type of shit that'll set me off. This is where I'm gonna start getting fucking Italian real quick.
Welcome back to Inner World. Man, we got some good stuff for you guys today. Dylan, my man, is here. We are ready to deploy an incredible gravy portal that just is so full of connections, really. That's the way that I would describe this topic. We're going to be discussing Baal, and I want to begin with a quote. The ancient sages did actually say one thing when they thought another. This appears from that general practice in the Greek philosophy of a twofold doctrine, the external and the internal, a vulgar and a secret. This is from Bishop Warburton back in 1738. And throughout our examination of this topic, just keep in mind how everything you've been presented as religious stories, mythology, even history, has been through the lens of this double doctrine. The internal meaning, the secret esoteric meaning for the initiated, and the exoteric meaning, the fable for the vulgar, the masses, the profane, call it what you will. So what inspired this conversation is how last episode we touched on Baal effigies being burned by Iranians, and how the Hebrew spelling of Baal as Bet Ayin Lamed, B-O-L, Bol, how that connects to the meaning of Bol being Lord or Baal being Lord, and the shadow language involved in the word Super Bowl that suggests some meaning of above the Lord, Super Bowl. Man, and that just set me off, and I had to bring more information on this topic because I feel like we touched on something that makes a lot of sense to me and Dylan, but to the average listener out there, they've not gone through all of the connections in the golden thread hiding in the name Baal. So of all the names of the deity, of God, of divinity from the ancient world, I think Baal is perhaps the most stigmatized and feared, as the name tends to be associated with Moloch and child sacrifice. Who is Baal? That's the question we're going to thoroughly investigate in this episode today. And in doing so, we will endeavor to show you that Baal is literally the greatest link in the chain for the eternal and universal empire that has shackled humanity in feudalism for thousands of years. I think it's the most important link in the chain linguistically and symbolically that actually show that the system that we're under today goes back so far beyond what we have in terms of a scope of history that it really boggles the imagination. You have in the East, in the West, Belenus of ancient Britain. You have Mahabali in India. You have this globe ball priesthood of the sun, leaving fingerprints of its system all across the world. And then it's later concealed. The evidence is hidden behind the constructed boogeyman of the Old Testament character Baal, whose name became a synonym for idolatry and child sacrifice. I'll quote the Bible at you, Hosea chapter 2, verse 16 through 17. And it shall be at that day, saith the Lord, that thou shalt call me Ishi, and shalt and shalt me no more Bali. For I will take away the names of the Baalim out of her mouth, and they shall no more be remembered by their name. So that's the agenda today. So much on our plate. We'll see how much this fits in what episode. We're gonna crush some gravy. I'm super excited. Dylan, opening thoughts.
While I was listening to you, it's also important to consider that what we say is be now, if you see it in a Greek context, oftentimes it's a V. So what would be Baal or Bol could also be Vul, and in fact is, which we'll get into that. In fact, it is that, which brings a whole new meaning to Volchi, or which is an Etruscan city state, or Vulcan. And
Absolutely.
that if you remove the bayit, or which is the B or V, they serve the same. They're the same letter in Hebrew, but also in Greek. You're left with ol, and you'll see that root ol, which signifies world, and you'll also see it in like olam and like the trees and the world trees. So just important because there's a lot of threads to that. There's definitely a system of radicals used that then get adjusted for context.
Yeah, the etymology exploration. I think I've said this before, but pretty much every name, I think I said this last episode, every name of God or a god is just one letter shift away from another name until you could just go throughout all of them and make one little shift at a time, and eventually you run the whole circle of every divinity that ever existed. And this even takes you as far as the Americas. You were talking about Vol instead of Bowl and Volchi. I didn't even include Vulcan or Volchi in the notes today. If there's gonna be a part 2 on this, it might have to do with getting really granular and just demonstrating how infinite the number of deities worldwide there are that have this BOL or just BL, phonetic going on. And what popped into my head as you're saying Vol, I was like, "Hey, the Mayan sacred history or sacred text is called the Popol Vuh." It's spelled VUH, but when people pronounce it, they're always putting like an L sound in there, like vol. And that sound basically that's a papal bull. It's like a decree from the Pope, the Popol Vuh. I don't know if that's really what the Mayans called it, but if that was invented by Catholics later, it's sort of almost like making fun. I don't know.
I've done an article on that. It has all the marks of not being uh, an old document. So, but
Not surprising.
it's another conversation.
So let's get into sort of the why first, and then we'll start getting into the what and how. History tends to be punctuated, if not defined, by wars and conquests. We know that. How many wars in our modern cultural memory began under the pretense of the prevention of some kind of terrible deeds or a retribution for genocide, allegedly? There's these certain ideas that are dangerous to the status quo, and they would disrupt the noble lie that keeps, or lies plural, that keep the serfs on their farms or in their cubicles all around the world and engaged in their servitude. If we step back and look objectively at the rationale behind why the system tends to conceal these dangerous truths, there is a pragmatic sense behind it that it would be more harmful potentially to a large number of people if society crumbled due to the erosion of religious ideals or national loyalties, these foundational belief systems that keep people clocking in and shipping the trucks around the world or the boats around the world or whatever the case may be. And I do understand that rationale. But on the other hand, is this a system worth keeping in place is a bigger question. And who benefits from the system staying in place and how long has the system existed? Many times, though, the most disruptive ideas and philosophies get concealed behind a mask of evil. something that totally turns off, dissuades, scares the average person from looking behind this evil to what is hidden in the facade or on the other side of this veil. I'm going to bring up an image here, and we've all seen this spooky, goat headed, big tittied God man, Baphomet, right? The Baphomet. This is the perfect example of what I'm talking about because the Templar Order was famously accused of worshiping Baphomet, and this idol was traditionally depicted as this grotesque amalgamation of man, woman, goat, sometimes with wings, sometimes with very long, almost bull like horns. And in my opinion, the narrative of the blasphemous Templars was there to conceal from view, especially with this image of the Baphomet that was shared by guys like Elphius Levi um, and other occultists. They would hide their dogma behind this symbol. They started using it later. But I think even going back to the time of the Templars, there was a potential for hiding the vast influence that this order held over banking and trade networks all throughout Europe and into the Middle East at the time of their fall. Whoever maybe inherited their network after the Templars themselves were sort of dethroned from this place in their banking and trade control, maybe they wanted to hide the fact that this power existed in the first place and they put it behind the veil of blasphemy. Don't look here. Don't look into the Templars. They're scary. They're dealing with satanic, forbidden stuff. And you can say the same thing about the atrocity propaganda regarding World War II. The crimes of the Hitlerian Germany, they create this buffer of disgust and repulsion and fear of the social stigma that would happen if you were to start asking questions too loudly. And it effectively bars the majority of people from ever considering that Hitler or those who supported the Reich may have been acting on some kind of important truths that nobody being all right or all wrong. But what if there was something that's being hidden in the Nazi ideology that had some sort of dangerous truth within it? And if you acknowledge that publicly, like I said, you're going to be intimidated or immediately assumed to be in support of atrocities and genocide. And then all nuance is lost in the good versus evil narrative of that particular war. So, Dylan, anytime you want to just like jump in as I'm talking about these things, raise your hand or wave at me. I can see you.
It is important to recognize that if you go back and read books from like the 19th century or earlier, the French called there's a language, it begins with a C.
Can't?
No, there's like a dialect or something. I can't remember, but basically you can find Baphomet is their word for Muhammad. And when did the Templars go and make all this stuff, happen? It's in like the 9th century. And it's only a couple centuries after the introduction of the so-called allegedly Muhammad, how do they say it in modern times? In older texts, I think they say Muhammadan history or whatever. But the reality
Or
is,
muscle man.
yeah, yeah,
I would rather be called, if I was a Muslim, I'd rather be called a muscle man
yeah.
personally.
You have to forgive me, man. I like don't live in the present when it comes to this knowledge because everything I read is like really is a lot older than what people talk about today. So I spell things differently, I pronounce things differently. But the reality is that word, and I learned this from an archbishop. So whenever you see Baphomet, it's a hidden version of Muhammad. And the Templars likely picked this tradition up in their excursions into that part of the world. And that's if it's organic. But what I suspect now, given how you and I have had conversations about the potential contemporary nature of all these things being used for different regions, that might be the very way of spreading Islam to that part of the world through these doctrines and through this occult system.
And there's also an interesting possibility that Islam was not the way that it is today when it was first introduced, and it was more close to the mystery school tradition in some way, more mystical. I think
Yeah,
when we
and
look at like Sufis and other offshoots of Islam, there's evidence for that too.
it's already been conceded that, like, even in the official narrative, the Quran, which is literally the sun, Helios, that's literally what the word means in Persian. Um, it's written, uh, 20 years after Muhammad's alleged death, and the excuse was it's recalling information from people who followed him, combined with a couple rotting documents that they salvaged, and then that was revised by someone else. So, in terms of like scholarly or archaeological scrutiny, Higgins said, like, whatever you think about that, if you're to apply that standard to anything else, it's no better than a forgery. And that's going to piss a lot of people off if they hear about that. But that's the problem with all three of these Abrahamic branches of religion, and why it's worth exposing is because the world's being constantly brought into war, and our standard of living is constantly being destroyed from time immemorial because of these religious zealots fighting over these narratives and using them as pretext for conquest.
Specifically the Abrahamics above all other religion. Absolutely. So there's a guy named John Toland who's a Irish philosopher who coined the term pantheism, actually. He wrote the following in a work called Clidophorus. Sounds like clitoris. I have I have more than once hinted that the external and internal doctrine are as much now in use as ever. So this guy's writing in 1750s. In another work, he says that esotericism is practiced not by the ancients alone, for to declare the truth, it is more in use among the moderns, although they profess that it is less allowed. So think about how much mythology of the modern world gets set up in the time period that this guy's writing, mid 1700s and a little after. The whole religion of the United States, which I'll call a religion, where the state becomes God instead of it being a theocracy with priests. It's a theocracy with elected representatives and forefathers who become the gods of that particular mythos, right? So he's saying at this time that esotericism was more in practice at that time than the ancients. And that's worth considering because this is the time period where central banking, as the modern version of banking, began getting set up throughout the world. This is like the first, and within a few decades of him writing this, is the first iteration of the United States' first central bank. So just keep that in mind for when we get to talking about banking more later in the notes. But to finish off this idea of atrocity propaganda and the veiling of knowledge that is going to be damaging to the controllers of the systems of the world. When we consider how Baal is used in the Bible, and if you haven't read the Old Testament, Baal is exactly like what I'm about to describe. He's a catch-all name to describe any and all deities aside from the God of the Old Testament, along with the atrocities that the narrative attaches to the name, such as child sacrifice, and idolatry and, all kinds of other barbaric behaviors to the point where to the modern Christians, modern Abrahamics, when you say Baal, you might as well be saying Satan. It's the same thing to their mind. So looking into Baal more closely for a religious person would be like asking them to research the tenets of Satanism and like it's basically anathema to them. So I see here the same strategic concealment as what I was describing with the Templars is going on with this character from the Old Testament, Baal. By associating Baal with the ultimate evils, blasphemies, atrocities, the worst things imaginable, important facts are hidden that undermine the foundations of all Abrahamic religions and their extended influence on feudalism, which still exists today, all the way from the distant past up to the modern iteration. So I think this is really the reason, this is the why it's important to understand what Baal means, how Baal exists universally as a concept, how Baal still is the system that the Baal system that we have today. I mean, if you read Dylan's second book, The Blackest of All Magic, he's throwing bail this, bail that around left and right, and you might be lost if you didn't have the context of this. So if anyone's read that book or hasn't read it yet and were to revisit it after this episode, it will make so much more sense when he's using, calling things bail this, bail that. It's because he's absolutely right on the money, but it's probably over a lot of people's head especially back when he wrote it.
And just thinking about how cowardly everybody is, that title alone scares people away from it. But like, we're literally showing you like, no, this is the blackest of all magic that's being used against you. And we're trying to give you the tools to defeat it. And you won't take it because the very tools to defeat the black magic are going to dispel your religion, and which is going to leave you with nothing other than being forced to confront the fact that you've believed in lies as history and you've spread those lies, which it's the ultimate hypocrisy that it forces you to confront, that at some point in time, almost all of us, no matter what part of the world you're living in, were raised to basically be vessels for that hypocrisy. And one of the things, just reading your notes, isn't it interesting that Allah in the way Baal is written, I'm just thinking to myself, well, if it's Father God, Ba and Al, or what people say El, it's also Jupiter, Jew, God, or you, Pater, God, Father, Father God. And so you literally say God the Father in all of your prayers. You're quite literally praying to the etymological same thing as Baal. And what I'm wondering is why they spell it with the ayin. Why the O? And this, I can't for the life of me make a decision on this, but I just think like after everything we've done, that what if the Ba'al, the Baal, is modern? And why is that spelled like that versus the O-L, the B-O-L? Why? I don't understand why anybody would ever transliterate it like that. And maybe my problem is I'm trying to find meaning where there is none, but that is something that, it's like a little splinter or something in my blanket. It's good. It's irritating.
Well, there's just so much contention about what IN really was in terms of how to transliterate it into English that it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to consider because it opens up the door to. We also know that just vowels are changeable to different dialects and regions, and the vowels are really not as important as the consonant structure of a word. But I love what you just said about Allah and the, is it Father God or are we praying to Father God or is it the Godfather? Which is it? Who is it? That's
And
in
now you're
charge.
looking at Don, which is a Trusho Phoenician word. That's like what we call, the patriarchs of our families in
I'm
Italy.
about to go there. Actually,
Oh,
this is some stuff that
and
might
that's
not have been there
Adonis.
when
Like
you.
what in the motherfuck?
Yeah, yeah. I got some stuff on that I didn't even I hadn't put into the notes yet when I sent them to you, so you might not have seen. But let's do this. Let's look at some of the etymology of the name itself. Baal, Baal. First of all, Ba or Ab is a fairly, I mean, not even fairly, I think totally universal phonetic to represent father. And just like the names of deities, and maybe this comes from like baby speak, I wonder, because of having a baby. You see words like Abba or Baba, and sometimes it's like they repeat the same thing, Baba, or sometimes it's Ab Ba, and they do one front to back and one backwards. So in India, Baba is an honorific title for a holy man, a saint, or a guru, in other words, a priest. And in this respect, that usage is identical to the other languages who refer to priests as father. So that's the Ba in Baal. And then Al or El is, of course, a name for the supreme being, God, and when doubled, becomes Allah. So elementary philology there. It demonstrates Baal to be Father God, the Godfather.
Um, some of the friends that I had when I was growing up, they were Jewish and they called their grandma Baba. So it also means grandmother. And then you also see this in Russian or like Ukrainian, Ukrainsky. They say babushka.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. There's and that kind of starts to speak to the gender fluidity of Baal. As we just saw with the Baphomet.
Like that,
So
like, is it? Like, it really is just the all it's like that, Jupiter is both the man and the eternal maid. It's the one and all.
yeah, well, I mean, that's the only way to conceive of God would have been both, and it's not really a dude. But if Baal, it means Lord. That's the way it's defined in the Hebrew that this word is based on in terms of the Old Testament. But etymologically, it says in the word Godfather. And I, so, I mean, I just said, I just wrote what you just said. One has to wonder what makes Baal different from Jove, from Jehovah, Yov. And indeed, God is called Lord, which is the meaning of the word Baal in the Old Testament over 6,000 times. When Lord in all caps is written, usually the Hebrew word is Yad He Vav He, Jove. And when it's found in lowercase, typically the Hebrew word is Aleph Lamed Dalet Yod, which is Adni or Adonai. And that, of course, Adonai is the Phoenician name for the sun, Adonis, which is admittedly said by Wikipedia to be a Canaanite word meaning Lord. So, as you were saying, Adon is a mafia boss. It's a title given to church fathers, or in other words, it's a lord. So, even in the name Adonis, that they're both so many different ways they're calling God in the Old Testament words that are a synonym for Baal. So it gets confusing, whenever I think maybe we ought to consider how what this word means because are we talking about a deity or are we talking about a a human ruler, a master here? I mean, we're going to see more how the lines between divinities and human masters is really blurry with these words in this language. And it's something that we have to think about because we're talking about a system that is like Russian dolls of a master within a master within a master within a master, or like rungs of a pyramid. And we're going to look at pyramids and how they relate to this, where each step of the ladder is a representative of the higher up being all the way up to the top of this system, which would be the Pope or the whoever the top intermediary of the invisible God would be. But I want to talk
The
about Adonis.
Popoville.
I want to talk about Adonis a little more
Hold on, I
because
got it. I got it.
yeah,
You gotta
yeah,
give
you
me
got it.
in some parts of the Bible, Adoni or Adonai is also written with a Vav in between the Dalet and the Nun. So it'd be like Adun. And when you consider the D to T interchange, as you'll see with the Bola artifact and what they explain that as, it's Adun is also Atun, 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 like Akhenaten that you see terminating and using all these like Egyptian archetypes. So it might be the same word.
It very possibly is. And also with Adonis, if we just get into the established exoteric mythology, Adonis is supposed to be the consort of Venus, her lover, and he's considered to be the ideal of male beauty. So Adonis is basically a synonym for beauty, just like Venus is a synonym for female beauty. So looking at words with a B to the L, what's belle mean in Latin languages, Romance languages, like Italian, French? Belle.
It's the root of war, bellum,
Oops. It also means
bellator.
but bellus in Latin or belle in Italian and French, it means beautiful. the belle of the ball, right? So, wow, we're talking about a god of war who is also the most beautiful. I mean, that's some interesting crossover with this word because we know that guy Jove, Jehovah, he's a man of war. But if he's Adonai, he's just so beautiful.
And the only time you see Jesus, which, people say Jesus or Jesus and all that stuff, in the Celtic world at that time, just look at the Pillar of the Boatman that was found in like the basement of Notre Dame. Jesus is a god of war. He's holding the club of Janus.
Wow. And that same club, when you look at Mesopotamian depictions of Bel Marduk or Baal, he's holding the same club in the same position, exactly identical to how Hercules or Heracles is depicted, just like the Heracles constellation is typically drawn to look. So, yeah, he's a beautiful, almost we would say like this could be the origin of the concept of a handsome devil. Because by the whole fear, disgust narrative constructed by the Old Testament that veils people from looking into Baal, you would assume that he's some kind of fearsome, frightening, demonic entity like the Baphomet we're just looking at, which is exactly what modern Christians still believe. And the truth we can just see right here in the language is a complete opposite that Baal, his association with the bull, is another point in this favor of beauty because the bull is still connected to Venus. Venus being astrologically said to be the ruler of the constellation Taurus, right? So really can't disconnect the beauty, the bull, the bell, and all of that from the Baal. It's all part of the same thing. And here's to go a little further with that. If we allow for some phonetic drift that I think is completely reasonable, Venus is absolutely near to the word Bellis, which is the word for beautiful, because if you, it makes sense given the similar meanings of both words, right? But first of all, we know the VB is common to be interchanged in many alphabets, in particular Greek and Hebrew. And while N switching to L is not as common of an interchange as far as I have seen, but maybe I've just overlooked it, just try out the sound of N and L in your mouth with attention to your tongue placement for each letter. Mm, oh, you see how like close to the same position your tongue goes for both of those sounds?
Mine's at like the top of my teeth with the N and the bottom of my teeth, the L.
Oh, yeah, but
Ugh.
like it's your tongue is going up to that same region, you know? Like we're in
Real
that same ballpark consonant wise with those 2 sounds.
So I thought you were going somewhere where you didn't go, but also consider that Bell with a little bit of philological adjustment or Vel um, is also Bar, the sun, or Ben, the sun. The same way where you're going with the root of Venus or Ven, uh,
Yep. Yep,
which
exactly. That's
and
that's
and that is
exactly it.
pertaining
Bene,
to the
good.
chase, the pursuit.
Oh, yeah, like and then we have the hunter aspect there too. But yeah, and bene, ben, that's good. We're talking about goodness here. So I would
And
say
sons, Bene Israel, the sons of Israel.
I think just like "va" and "ba" are nearly the same in your mouth, I think "l" and "in" are just as close to the way your mouth works saying those letters as "v" and "b." So, we could say Venus is Bellis, literally, because Venus is beautiful, and that's the meaning of Bellis. Or we could say Venus is Bellis because philologically, they're so similar word-wise, and if that's the case, Adonis is Baal because both words mean Lord. So there you go.
And it gets even weirder because vellum is processed historically from animal skin, specifically calf skin.
And that's to make parchment, paper, Liber, right? I mean, just what's the root of Lieb? Liber? Lieb? Put that backwards, and it's Bill.
That
The
is
whole system.
wild.
The whole system, man. Yeah. Um, Now let's look at the word rabbi. That's a Jewish
Well,
religious.
for those who don't know, Liber is also tree bark that they wrote on. That's why books are called Liber. So just in case someone's new,
Yes, and Liber was the name of Bacchus as well, or a title.
Liber Pater.
Yes, the free father, the father of the book. But rabbi, here's one. We haven't talked about this word before. Me is a religious father. It's a priest, essentially. It comes from Resh Aleph Bet, which is Rab, R-A-B, or pronounced maybe Rav, R-A-V. It means literally that root Rab means master. So a lord. So with the RL interchange, read it as it looks. You know, read it as it looks in Hebrew. Instead of right to left, read it left to right like we would read it. And RAB, just swap that out. It's BAL right there. You have the same root in rabbi. And if we switch it to the V instead, it's instead of Baal, it's Val. Also in Arabic, Rab is a term that they use for Lord or God, like the Lord God. So you got to ask yourself, with all these connections, does this mean Valhalla is the hall of Baal? Valhalla?
It's there. That's I hadn't considered that one, but that's it. That's a really interesting one. And before people say that there's no connection, just keep in mind that the Scandinavian runes are descended from the Etrurian alphabet out of Clusium in Italy.
Well, and we'll talk about it more later, but what's the other word for bull besides what's the other word for bull here? It's Tor, Taurus, Thor. There it is. Thor literally is the same root as tar, the Greek word for bull. So we have all connections here. It goes everywhere. Also, the most common word for husband in modern Hebrew. Did you know it's Baal? They call husbands Baal in modern Hebrew, which is so ironic because I don't think that the husbands are typically the master of the wife in these families, but I could be wrong.
I'll tell you what, man, those Eastern Europeans who have a 60 to 80% genetically a genetic DNA match to Italians, they really took this to the next level.
So we'll look at more philological implications of Baal later if we get that far or next time. But for now, the key to listen up, the key that connects all the ideas under Baal that the Old Testament is concealing behind the boogeyman are it's words with the B to the L spelling and all the interchanges. Let's just to keep it simple, B to L or R instead of L or V instead of B. Bull and ox symbolism, words for Lord, Father, or Master, deities associated with beauty, and of course, money, which is what's money? It's bullion, bullion.
That's a good one. I didn't even consider that one, and we're not gonna get there yet, but that's gonna come into play with the etymology of bull. So hang on to that.
Yeah, we are cruising right along. This is what I like. We're just ladling it. So, Dylan, I'm going to have you, if you don't mind, would you read some of the quotes that are in this next section? I'll just
Yes,
kick it to you.
starting at Meru,
Let's start with you.
the pyramid
Yeah,
of
we'll have you
Belus,
read when
or
we
do you
get to
want?
that point. So I'll go down to that point, and then you can read the big block quotes.
Okay.
And let me get the images ready that we'll need for this section. This is a fun section. So, Sir William Jones, you may have heard this name before. He was an incredibly distinguished scholar of language and religion who explored the Far East in the early formation of the British Empire, being one of the first researchers to have access to these languages and mythologies coming from a Western background. And I think I'll add too, before some major sanitization maybe possibly occurred to the whole system, when he had closer access to what it was really like there before the empire comes in and starts imposing all kinds of stuff on the locals, right? This is in the early 18th century. So in his day, it would have been incredibly dangerous to challenge the orthodox view of antiquity and biblical history. So remember what I said about where I quoted this guy saying that esoteric writing or concealing the truth of what you really think or mean was more common in modern times than it was with the ancients, which is saying a lot. Saying a lot, all right? So keep that in mind with this quote from William Jones. Either the first 11 chapters of Genesis are true, or the whole fabric of our national religion is false. A conclusion which none of us, I trust, would wish to be drawn. He also confessed in other writings of being obliged, of course, to believe the sanctity of the venerable books of Genesis. So this is an example of like, in text, I think there's like a wink, nod, or wink, wink, elbow here. Like either the first 11 chapters of Genesis are true or the whole fabric of our national religion is false. A conclusion which none of us, I trust, would wish to be drawn. In that statement, he does not say which it is. He says it's either this or that. And of course, to we don't want our national religion to be false. This is an example of writing esoterically, where he's telling you the truth without telling you. But he's almost I mean, this is just so thinly veiled. It's kinda obvious to me, but it gives you plausible deniability if you need it when you say things in this fashion, you
At
know?
a time where you need it.
Yeah, if you go too hard like Robert Taylor, you're in jail.
And the publisher, almost everybody around, we're going to talk about that in a future episode as we wind down that work. He wasn't the only one thrown in jail. His publisher's mistress or wife. I mean, like, listen, the stuff that we have access to today, be very grateful because people they had their lives destroyed over it. So, and William Jones, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't looked into him in a long time, but I remember he was fluent in damn near 8 languages or something like that. And then he could get by in another like 12 or something if he had the proper dictionary to like refer to. Like the guy was a remarkable man in terms of knowledge. And it's so sad because I think he died in like somewhere in between his 40s or 60s. I just remember seeing like whenever he died, I'm like, damn, he died so young because he died of like some disease or dysentery bullshit that he contracted in was it Calcutta, something like that.
Oh, it's too much poop. His system was not really
Yeah,
designed.
he couldn't
He didn't
handle
have the
that Diwali
constitution.
festival, like his body wasn't built for that shit. Literally.
Yeah. He's too white for all that poop in public. Just didn't work for him. So, I'll say, I think off the top of my head that his work, philologically speaking, William Jones is very foundational to a lot of the modern ideas about, like, Proto-Indo-European languages, and I don't think that that's accurate. Like, there is no such thing as PIE, Proto-Indo-European. I'll comment more about that as we go forward, but what's important about Jones is how his public statements portray a man of faith who upholds the credibility of scripture literalism as history, while at the same time his researches consistently undermine that alleged faith. So if his stated views support dogma while he privately believed otherwise or knew otherwise, he would just be one amongst hundreds or thousands of philosophers and clergymen who communicate truths esoterically to other learned men while supporting fables for the commoners. I mean, that's not bizarre, that's par for the course. And par also is a Hebrew word for a bull. I just remembered that. Par is another
Oh,
word for bull,
oh,
and they're P to B, R to L, par ball. See what I mean? You
I
just
was at
swap these
the
letters.
coffee shop right before this, before we rushed to do this. I was reading your notes, and that P and F are the same letter in Hebrew. So you could be possibly looking at the root of Pharaoh.
Or Farsi, which is what Persia was called. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't even gone into the F of it all. But it's crazy, like, it's never ending. That's why I call it this is
What
literally the
the
golden
F is
thread.
going on here?
This is the golden thread, for sure. So, William Jones, back to him, he's generally been held in very high regard by later scholarship, even if they maybe twist his research to support the modern academic establishment status quo of history and linguistics. But the same is not true of some of the other members of the Asiatic Society that he was like the head guy of. These researchers, British researchers in India and in China, essentially. A good example is Colonel Francis Wilford. He contributed to the same journal, Asiatic Researches, and he provided many good articles on geography and mythology. And like many of his contemporaries, the similarities that Wilford found between Eastern and Western traditions was completely impossible to ignore, leading him to the conclusion that the furthest antiquity of this system must originate from India. And that's where these guys have great research, but their conclusions based on the fact that they're trying to make it fit into biblical history being literal and other problems, it just doesn't hold up in the conclusion, but that doesn't mean the observations are invalid. I would say imagine a puzzle with 10,000 pieces and a lot of them fit with the multiple other pieces, not just one other piece, and half the pieces are irretrievably lost. Imagine that. So you're trying to put a picture together out of these fragments, and you're also under the threat of being fired, disinherited, possibly jailed, maybe even, you know, yeeted out of existence completely if you suggest that that puzzle is of a picture that is not supported by the orthodoxy. So the evidence that these British dudes in India and in China found in this scenario where the Bible has to somehow be the real history, that means that they pretty much had no choice other than to try and locate the stage of that narrative somewhere in India because they're seeing that narrative in Indian antiquity. And since that's a fruitless and incorrect thesis, his observations are coming from a time before the extreme sanitization done by later academics and the Indians themselves to distance modern thinkers from entertaining the syncretism heresy that 18th and 19th century researchers constantly were demonstrating to exist. Syncretism, syncretist, like that's thrown around like it's a bad word by modern academics. Like you're hurting my cultural uniqueness. I get that even from individuals who are like, how dare you how dare you suggest that my preferred flavor of paganism or religion is the same as somebody else's flavor of paganism or religion? So what they did to this guy, Colonel Wilford, uh, because he was not of high enough status as maybe as a William Jones, who was a sir rather than a colonel, he couldn't have his reputation insulated from being destroyed by the academic establishment despite doing good work. And that he continues to be buried under, these kind of ad hominem attacks or not addressing the actual work itself, right? That's how they do it. So at the Wikipedia page for Wilford, it describes his work as fanciful, sensational, controversial, and highly unreliable, and goes on to frame him as a hopeless racist, denounces life's work with modern anti-colonial and woke rhetoric nonsense. So I think we should examine some of his forgotten work here, because I think this is a guy that deserves our respect and should be brought back into people's awareness rather than getting constantly derided by deranged and brainwashed fanatics. But I will say, to address the controversy, he what is said about what the thing that is said that is meant to discredit all of his work is that he had like a major domo, if you will, like a, a helper or like I don't know, an aide in India who was allegedly versed in the sacred scriptures and stuff like that. And the claim is that this aide or helper, when Wilford would ask about a certain topic from their mythology, the Hindu cosmology, that this guy would just make up stuff that he thought that Wilford wanted to hear. And I think there's some possible truth to that.
I've heard their culture is very much like that.
Well, that's literally, yeah, that's a thing that they do. It's still a thing. But on the other hand, the claim is that the guy wrote somewhere around the amount of 11 or 12,000 lines of like scriptural poetry and verse essentially, and that it was convincing. And I'm like, that is a Herculean effort to deceive. And the parts that we're going to read, of his work have clear receipts that we can go find that make it, it holds up. It holds up. It's not made up. So the fact is that they are discrediting his entire body of work based on the fact that he may have been tricked by a Hindu guy who was making stuff up that he thought he wanted to hear, which, is very possible, but it's like
Well, that's
throwing
why
out
it's important
baby
to
with the
like,
bathwater.
but that is why it's important to never if you're unsure, just have the humility to be like, this is what I'm looking at. I think, I don't, who knows what he was like as a person, but perhaps he was really arrogant about it. So that when it did come out, it made people less tolerant of his mistake. I don't know, but that is kind of like the thing to kind of preface whenever you are putting something forward to like, that's why citation and all that stuff is important if you want people to take you seriously, because a lot of people don't want to lose their own career by repeating what you said if it turns out what you said is nonsense.
It's fair enough. So I'm going to give you I'm going to set you up to read this quote here. This is from Asiatic Researchers, Volume 10, essay number 6. And we're talking about India and Mount Meru while giving what I think is really amazing evidence of the universal diffusion of this religious system and hierarchy. And, we need this holy mountain symbolism to at least dip into it in order to understand how that's reflected like societally and legally, that it shows that, or is a point of evidence to demonstrate, um, where our current system comes from of compartmentalization and pyramidal corporate structure. So start there at Meru.
Yeah. And before I do, I have some inquiries, or I kind of wonder if Meru, or like, as you're saying, like, is it Mount Moriah or Mount Moria? Whatever that word is, they're all closely related to words that pertain to the sea and also have Eros or Eru or Oru, Horus, or in it. And I wonder if there's a connection there. Maybe it's just coincidence. Anyways, he wrote Meru with its 3 peaks on the summit. I'm reminded of the 3 significant points of declination on the ecliptic. You have the tropics and the equator, or the equinoxes. So the sun's going from each one. And it's 7 steps. And whenever you see 7, it's usually pertaining to the 7 summer months, Aries through Libra, or the 7 planets, or the 7 milkmaids, or the Pleiades, the 7 milkmaids of the Big Dipper. Anyways, those includes and encompasses really the whole world. Keep in mind another name, the translation of that word is cosmos in Greek, or mundus in Latin, or tevel in Hebrew, according to the notions of the Hindus and other nations. The Jews were acquainted with the 7 stages, zones or divapas of the Hindus, but I have since discovered a curious passage from the Zohar Manasi on the creation as cited by Basnage, I don't know how to say that last name, Basnage, in his History of the Jews. There are, says the author, 7 earths, whereof one is higher than the other, for the Holy Land is situated upon the highest earth, and Mount Moriah, or Meru, is in the middle of that Holy Land. It's interesting that he calls it a Holy Land, huh? This is the hill of God, so often mentioned in the Old Testament, the Mount of Congregation, where the mighty king sits in the sides of the north, according to Isaiah. And there is the city of our God. The Meru of the Hindus has the name of Sava. I'm not sure how that word's pronounced. It's spelled Sabha, but that BH might signify something different.
Or could be Shaba.
Shaba, yeah.
I think very related. Could be connected
Sabbath.
to Sabbath, Shabbat.
Mm-hmm. Or the congregation. So the Meru of the Hindus has that name of Sabha, or the congregation. And the gods are seated upon it in the sides of the north. Clearly, I think they're talking about the circumpolar stars and how if you look at everything, it has like a funnel slash peak slash mountain to it. But that's how I would interpret it. Anyways, he continues, thus, Meru is the worldly temple of the Supreme Being in an embodied state and of the Trimurti, or sacred triad, which resides in its summit, either in the single or threefold temple, or rather in both, for it is all one, as they are one in three, right? That's literally Eko Deva Tramuti, one God, three forms. They are three only with regard to men involved in the gloom of worldly illusion, but to men who have emerged out of it, they are but one. I think that's an initiatory sentence. It's probably why you have it in bold. And their threefold temple and mountain with its three peaks become one equally. Mythologists of the West called the world, or Meru, with its appendages, the temple of God, according to Macrobius.
Yeah, so this is a big deal that in the Zohar, the Jewish scripture, is referring to Mount Moriah, which is an Old Testament location that biblical literalists think is somewhere like in the Holy Land that they can go find. The place where Moses met the burning bush, the place where Isaac was almost sacrificed before he was replaced with a ram. A lot of action happens around Mount Moriah, which is clearly, especially when you just delete vowels out of it, it's Meru. When we back up to the symbolism about the holy mountain that refers to us back to the ark lands on the mountain. The ark is represented by the mountain. God or a god is uh, nursed within a sacred mountain that is like his mother or has the same name as a goddess. And the mountain, the holy mountain Meru, is like the whole world, and around it are different levels of liquid or ocean, right? That's just like the ark being the only thing in the world, or the whole representing the whole world, or containing all the life that's left in the world on water, on mare, on the sea. So, also when we look at these dwapas or diva appas, let's just think about that word. You know, these are the different zones of the world, or the stages or the levels of the world. And if we associate that with 7 planets, we just break this word apart from the way the Hindus say it, it's basically Deva, which is a god, and Abba or Appas, which is either a father, godfathers, or it's Apis, the bull, right? So it's like god bulls, god lords, god masters, godfathers. So there's a there's a an incarnation or a lord for each part of the world. There could be something esoterically being said about that, because the very beginning of this passage, Meru includes and encompasses really the whole world. You know, or is this, can we take this? It's up to you to decide whether or not to take it this way, but can we take this to mean that this system encompasses the whole world? You know, if we're looking at it as a system rather than as literally the structure of Earth, something to consider. You know, according to, as Wilford writes, the Hindus and other nations, it is the whole world. And perhaps I think the the universality of this system of priesthood, which Wilford would have to be able to observe, as educated as he was and investigating the Far East like this, he would not be willing to admit it fully, or at liberty to admit it fully. He could only say it in a veiled way. So just to, you know, the problem with esotericism is you can never take a passage and be like, it definitely secretly means that. But we have to open ourselves up to these kind of interpretations, especially when other things are leading us to a similar conclusion. If we can see that conclusion in a veiled way in this kind of writing, it's worth just holding it in our pocket and, you know, thinking maybe that's what it really meant. Because obviously the literal meaning of Mount Meru, if we were to take it as like this is actually the structure of the earth, becomes obviously a fable, right? I mean, there's nothing we can get out of taking it literally. So
I have a
also I think,
question before you proceed.
yeah.
That Zohar Manasseh or Manassi, I don't know how it's pronounced. I can't really. I just did like a brief search on it. I can't find that, but I can find a rabbi from Portugal, Manasseh ben Israel, and that's from like the 1600s. Was that? Do you think he was writing like that's the guy who wrote that portion or whatever?
I think we'd have to just look at like what does Manasseh mean in Hebrew, and I think we're just really referring to the Zohar with that statement.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was just curious because the name Manasseh,
Oh, I'm
that guy.
sorry. I got it. I got it. I lo it's manna. So it's like literally it's saying Zohar manna, which is, an adjective that is attached to the Zohar
Gotcha.
as it represents a living bread from heaven or manna from heaven because it's like spiritual food or spiritual nourishment.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess the reason I was interested in it is because if it's from that guy that I just found, he was kicked out of or he left Portugal during the Inquisition, but that would be a mark of it being a young creation. But if it's not the same thing, then
Hmm.
never mind. That's the
So
problem with a lot of these old authors. They're not specific in what they're talking about, and that can be really frustrating because it can lead to having to assume things or whatever.
yeah, and again, that's exactly what I'm, trying to get at with this. Meru really encompasses the whole world. That this pyramid scheme encompasses the whole world because later in the passage, if we were to uh, look at how he admits the sacred trinity is three for men in illusion, but one to men who have emerged out of it, it's clear that there's esoteric elements in what Wilford is writing about.
He's
That's like
literally writing like an initiate.
yeah, exactly. There's your clue. So if he can say that part to you, that part's allowed. What else is being said that we should take between the lines here? I like what obviously Maru as a physical structure, the geometry of it, that is an illusion for men who want to believe that religious superstition about the physical world. But, you know, if we're going to look at this synoptically with our eye as single, what is the what could this mean where it's actually true? So, read this next paragraph for us here. I'll bring up a picture.
Is it
Hence,
oh, hence, okay, I gotcha. Wilford continued, hence, this most sacred temple of the Supreme Being is generally typified by a cone or pyramid with either a single chapel on its summit or with three, either with or without steps. Wilford has a lot more to say about these pyramids, which we need to thoroughly discuss, and which has been justified by later discoveries of which he'd have no knowledge of. But for now, let us look at the pyramids and why they must be shrouded in mystery and their origins never truly exposed to the public, lest the house of cards regarding the Orthodox historical narrative be well and truly demolished.
that's right. Here we go. The missing capstone on the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's an object of speculation and wild speculation at that, charged with symbolic associations gained over centuries. But one thing which I've never heard anyone say about it was the possibility that there was no capstone, that atop the pyramid there was a single chapel on its summit, as Wilford wrote. And when we start to look at other pyramidical similar structures throughout the world, uh, that becomes oh, I'm in the wrong slide here. That actually starts to become quite obvious that there is something to that. Right? Can you see this slide? Okay. So now this is the ziggurat of Ur in Mesopotamia. And this is a photo, but if we were to look at what it's assumed to have been structured like in the ancient world, you see at the top, we have these multiple levels, right? If we count on the ground, if we count the ground and the flat zones between the larger sections, starting at the bottom, the ground, you'd actually be able to count 7 levels up to the top of the ziggurat. And then on top, it looks a lot like it could be a chapel there, exactly like Wilford is describing. Here are supposed pyramids in China. They're not much discussed. If the photos are real, they would demonstrate, I think, a similar system as what is described by Wilford. Here is India. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, it's kinda hard to tell. Let's just count by the holes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Looks like 7 doorways. I'm not sure. I don't think the 7 is something to get hung up on. It's really more about the pyramidical structure, the step structure. And we're looking at Mexico. These are all over Mexico. Now
And
we're gonna
keep in
look at
mind, a lot of these have been restored because they were found in a state of ruin and being covered in overgrowth and God knows what else. So that's something that people don't often tell you when they talk about these subjects. And it's like, I understand maybe just you don't want to get bogged down in the weeds, but I do want to get bogged down in the weeds because it's
sure.
important to think when you're trying to determine if something's authentic. Well, we do it with writing. We also have to do it with architecture. You're not necessarily looking at the original architecture.
But it is interesting that there's like a chapel on top here. This is one I don't know a lot about, but this is supposedly off the coast of Japan called Yonaguni, and that looks just identical to Mayan stuff in a lot
Like
of ways.
without better provenance, that looks fake to me, or like somebody made it for divers. But who
Could
knows?
be. Yeah, this allegedly exists in Japan. I think it's interesting how the name has, like, yoni in it, Yoniguni. But if this is real, there's, like, a chapel on the
He's
top.
the gooner of the yoni.
And now this is the Cahokia Mounds in North America, just a little north of where I live, and it's possible that places like this are remnants of the same pattern. I'm not gonna be able to say for sure, but I just wanted to show how stepped pyramidical structures in different forms are definitely a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, we just scratched the surface with that. What is important is that we're talking about I want this to go back into context of Wilford saying that really Mount Meru is the entire world. Through the context of there was a worldwide system of some kind, right?
And it's also important to the at least one school of thought, like the Hermeticists and all that, they maintain that the pyramids were in fact observatories, and the priests were called the priests of Anu, which I've speculated is literally signifies the priests of the year, the people who determine the year. But who knows?
Yeah, and an observatory chapel. A chapel is a house for priests. Priests are astronomers by nature in the ancient world. I think that totally checks out.
And William Bryant makes the case for the word chapel being derived from kath el.
You want to go with this next, continuing with Wilford, forming the two paragraphs there?
Continuing with Wolford, who was writing about sacred temples in the shapes of cones or pyramids, went on to say this worldly temple is also considered by the followers of Buddha as the tomb of the son of the spirit of heaven, whom I conceive to be the first man, re-emerging in every kalpa, or the first lawgiver, often confounded with the first man. His bones or limbs were scattered all over the face of the earth like those of Osiris and Jupiter Zagreus. To collect them was the first duty of his descendants and followers, and then to entomb them. Out of the filial piety, the remembrance of his mournful search was yearly kept up by a fictitious one, with all possible marks of grief and sorrow, till a priest announced that the sacred relics were at last found. This is practiced to this day by several Tartarian tribes in the religion of Buddha, and the expression of the bones of the Son of the Spirit of Heaven is peculiar to the Chinese and some tribes in Tartary. The Buddhists in
So
this. Oh, go
let's
ahead.
hold up real quick. I want to comment on that. So, talking about sacred relics and, basically like the bones of Buddhas, stuff like that, and the other relics that they supposedly owned that became holy, objects of veneration. Now, you might think Christianity has nothing to do with that, or Judaism has nothing to do with that. But I will
What?
say,
Wait, have you seen the
I
bones of the
wouldn't say that,
saints?
but like people might at first, especially Protestant people, might at first think, "Oh, that's not Christianity." But I am like, as somebody that posts religious syncretism mythology type things on TikTok with shorts and clips, my algo wants to show me uh, that type of content. And so what I just see when I open up the app all the time, it'll be some video like in there's such bad grammar, like stuff's misspelled, but it'll be like the caption will be like, "You say there's no proof that Jesus was real?" And then I'm like, I'm listening. Prove it to me." And then it will just flash through images of all this bullshit, like the Shroud of Turin and like some old ass nails that obviously they came from the cross. And you're like thing after thing. And by the end of the 1 minute clip, they'll show you about 8 or 9 sacred artifacts that were somehow they came from the time of Jesus or they're owned by Jesus. eh, And the crown of thorns, they'll show you like the crown of thorns. And so that's your proof he was real. I mean, so
And,
when you understand how this kind of stuff affects moderns today, gives them some kind of feeling of connection to this fable from the past. There's no is In all likelihood, that's the very reason why these kind of, rituals of going to find, the scattered bones or limbs of Osiris, all the way to looking for, uh, the the whole ritual around pieces of Buddha or things that Buddha owned, from east to west. I think there's it's as simple as that, like, that's why this tradition exists. It connects the credulous masses to the fable in a way that feels tangible and real to them, and they love it.
and what's interesting is usually when you see that like well, so where you get the 14 pieces of Osiris is from Plutarch, and he writes basically the signification of it is the 14 days that the moon goes from being new to visible, or excuse me, full to new, where you can't see it anymore. So like there's always an astronomical symbolism, and the more watered down the story is and the more like complex it is, I always think it's people covering up for not knowing the real specification and just kind of elaborating to cover up for the fact that they don't really know the real signification of the story.
So go ahead and do the next quote, the next paragraph.
Perfect. So he continued, the Baudists. I wonder why did he ever say why he transliterated it as Baudd for Bood?
If he does, I didn't read it.
Okay.
I
It would just be
only
interesting.
yeah. I only
Anyways,
read this one essay of his. I know he's got other essays.
mhm. He wrote, the Baudists in this country are so close, reserved, and ignorant in general that hardly any information can be obtained on this subject. Besides, they acknowledge that it is so awful a theme that they really avoid to make it a subject of conversation. They confess that the pyramids in which in which the sacred relics are deposited, be their shape what it will, are an imitation of the worldly temple of the Supreme Being, and which it is really the tomb of the first of his embodied forms, or of his son, in the language of the Chinese, Tartars, and of the Greeks also, who were little acquainted with the system of emanations and incarnations. They also declare that many of these pyramids do not really contain the bones of the Thakur, or Lord, and though they are to be supposed and asserted to contain them, the real place where they are deposited should remain unknown in order to prevent profanation. Exactly like the various tombs of Osiris. For this reason, the sacred relics, instead of being deposited in the pyramid, are always placed in a small vault deep underground at some distance from it, as at Sarnata near Benares.
So things are getting interesting here. Deep underground bases. Where they're keeping the aliens. That's the relic of the next religion potentially is fake aliens. But let's look at the Hindu word
Are you
thakur.
keeping your eye on the time?
Yep, I would like to. It's going to be maybe a longer one today. We're going to do what we can, but I want to get through this section
Hey,
and then we'll
mofos are
switch
getting
it
their
up.
money's worth. Here we go.
Yeah, they are. They're getting their free money's worth, but the real good stuff is on part 2. Honestly, this is just setting it up. So let's look at this Hindu word thakur that he used
Your
here.
mother soccer.
Guess what Thakur means? Lord, master, holy man, or deity. Wow. It's like the same.
Tupac Thakur.
And this word supposedly first appears in medieval Sanskrit, which, in my opinion, is the same time frame as the emergence of the Bible. Feudalism is a system which intentionally equates the ruling class with divinity in the eyes of the commoner. And one way of doing that is to literally call God and the local ruler by the same name, be it Baal, Lord, or Thakur. Is Thakur related to the curs or the despicable dogs we call Cohen? Cohen King? Kuan? One of the most underlooked philologically valid letter swaps is the R to the N, the rhoticism. Kuan becomes cur. So you see how they both mean the same thing, dog. Is the cur in Thakur related to Curios, the Lord? I think both of these are likely.
Hold on a
Cure.
second. I'm just seeing this for the first time, and it might be totally nonsense. But when you look at Kion in Greek, how it's spelled, transliterate for English speakers would be like K Y O N or K U O N. Well, considering that the R and N are interchangeable, like the word bar and ben both mean son. Yeah, like SON. That could literally be in reverse ruach, which is spirit, Keon or Cohen. So
Yeah.
I don't know why I just saw that. I don't know. I just kind of seeing the symbols before I
Unhinged.
bomb around.
Unhinged. Unhinged. So, yeah, and I just mentioned Cur and Thakur and Kurios. For those who don't remember or need to be told, Kurios is the word in Greek that is used for Jesus when in the New Testament they call him Lord. So, Cur, Lord. That's important for the context of Baal. You know, if they were writing the Old Testament Hebrew version of the New Testament, if it was written in that language, they very well might have been calling Jesus Baal instead of Kurios. That's worth keeping in mind. So I want to reiterate, though, I think what is most important is where Wilford says the Buddhists in this country are so close, reserved, and ignorant in general that hardly any information can be obtained on this subject. Do you really think anything has changed since the 18th century in that regard, apart from there being a much stronger momentum of academic orthodoxy from the West imposed upon these Eastern countries that veil works like Asiatic researches? What do you think? I don't think anything has changed.
I think it's even worse. I
Yep.
think just talk because I talk to people all the time. I'm actually an extrovert, and it is I don't I don't like belittle people, but just when they regurgitate like their beliefs of history, it's literally what Fox News and CNN tell them. It they're so one-sided and thoroughly indoctrinated. I have lost all hope of this work ever penetrating people in our day. I think it'll be valuable long after we're gone. And by the way, I don't say that as a depressing thing. I just think everything's a numbers game and there are not, I mean, we can literally get compliments from someone like Kyle Denton who says our work is the best he's ever seen on the internet. And nobody, or pertaining to the subject, right? Not on anything, but just on this subject. And the fact that it's not like the fact that this isn't going viral, the fact that more people aren't grasping the stuff that we talk about, it shows you that how degraded everything is because everybody wants the bad stuff to end, but nobody wants to empower themselves with the knowledge to defeat all the presumptions that are being used to enact the bad behavior. So what it means is people don't really want to solve anything. They just want to bitch about everything. And they want you to hear them bitch so they can feel better after they've bitched long enough. It's a society of smooth-brained retards. I have zero confidence in this ever uh, being used in a court of law or something like an international court to bring anybody to justice. And that's why I think it's even worse now than it is back then, because back then I think people were so at a level of just trying to survive. They didn't have the luxury to look at this. Now everybody has the luxury to look at it, but they're so distracted by all these other little, so much other things to satiate themselves.
Never say never, man.
I'd
Maurice, who
love to
needs
be,
to
I'd
hear?
love, prove me wrong. If you're watching this, prove us wrong. Make this shit go viral, get us millions of followers. And then you won't have people going on to these podcasts with 7 million fucking subscribers talking about how a man actually resurrected from being dead with a straight fucking face, by the way.
I'm gonna it goes through. I'm gonna take us through the end of this section. There's a lot of quotes, but uh, I'm gonna get us through it. This is like the most important part. This following passage is actually what drew me to Wilford, his essay in the first place. He wrote, "Such of these monuments as belong to the Buddhas are called the temples of Buddha. They might also be called the temples of Bala or Balas, one of the titles of Buddha, but little known now and more particularly to the vulgar. The word Balas, properly pronounced, sounds exactly like Belos in Greek and Belus in Latin. May we not then reasonably suppose that the temple and tomb of Belus at Babylon was precisely a similar monument and calculated for the very same purpose?" So these temples or these stupas, these towers, were for Balas, a title of Buddha, according to Wilford. One on the summit of it was a chapel dedicated to Belus, according to Herodotus, referring to the tomb of Belus at Babylon. So the tomb had a chapel at the top. The reason maybe they're even calling it a tomb is because it holds these relics that are supposedly a finger of the god or the being or whatever. Diodorus the Sicilian says there were three, but this is immaterial, for Balas is three and one. Besides, the temple of Herodotus probably consisted of three chapels. About the center of the tower, in the middle, was the tomb of Balas, and near it, in the body of the pyramid also, another chapel, exactly as in the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. It is probable, however, that the bones of Belus were not deposited in the ostensible tomb, but were concealed in a secret vault, in some other part of the pyramid or tower. It appears, then, that the pyramids were similar fabrics, and intended for the very same purpose. For the Egyptians, the Phoenicians likewise, had their Belus, as well as the Babylonians and Hindus, and this Belus, it is probable, was originally the same through these different countries. Like all the temples and tombs of Belus in India, the pyramids had no opening whatever, except one or two. It is, however, pretty certain that all the pyramids were not intended for the reception of the bones of Belus. Many were probably intended for the burial of a very few exalted and sacred characters, like the Grand Lamas of Tibet, with a few others who were always buried under pyramids. But these are acknowledged to be forms of Buddha, though of an inferior rank. See what I'm talking about? This is rank, inferior rank. There, maybe this is a mistranslation or a misunderstanding of the concept of each rung of the ladder in feudalism represents the top of the ladder as a, middle, upper middle, lower middle management in a sense. It's kind of like that. It's a corporate structure. So, continuing, he said, as the Egyptians concealed most carefully the real place where their Belus was entombed, it is not unlikely that the Great Pyramid was only an ostensible one, and of course allowed to remain open. For we are told that the body of him for whom it was intended never was deposited there, or if deposited, it was not in the ostensible tomb, but into some secret place under the pyramid. The limbs of Osiris were buried separately, and on the very spot where Isis found them, and he was torn into 14 pieces, others say 26. The general opinion is that Isis collected all the limbs in a coffin, like which she made many others, and presented them to several cities through Egypt, assuring privately to everyone that they possessed the real one. It is supposed that Osiris was entombed near Memphis, though the spot was never known. The Tower of Babel seems then to have been the worldly temple of the spirit of heaven, and the tomb of his son. either the first man of the Kalpa or the most ancient king and legislator of the country. Now, stay with me here. This is a good part. There were 4 Adams and 4 Buddhas also, and we are now under the 4th, according to the traditions of the Mussulmans, which is Muslims, and of the Buddhas, or Buddhists. Adam's body was, at his own request, entombed in a cave or vault called Alkanuz, a mountain in which the center of the a mountain in the center of the world, and of course, the Meru of the Hindus, and represented by artificial hills, either of stone or earth, and of various shapes like Meru. So I'm going to pause here. According to the Muslims, there's 4 atoms. Atom Each atom is the same thing. It's a reincarnation of the supreme being, or it's the son of God. Jesus is an incarnation of Adam. This is this established but esoteric fact. Now, when we talk about where's Jesus's crucifixion, where's the holy spot to Jesus? It's the Golgotha or Calvary, place of the skull, which is a peak. In terms of the symbolism of the body, the mountain is the top of the body, or the head is the top of the body. It's the top of a mountain. This is your chapel, right? Your skull is the chapel of the pyramid of your body. And I don't know where he got this fucking idea, but I saw a clip of Mel Gibson on Joe Rogan podcast, and he's like, yeah, and the reason why they called the place where Jesus was crucified Golgotha, the skull, is because Adam Adam's skull was actually secretly buried there. It's like so cringe, man. And he was like, acting like he was just dropping the hugest truth bomb to the world. And sorry, Mel, I don't think you understand what this is really all about. But think about that 3 chapels, 3 in 1 symbolism at the top of the holy mountain. How many crosses were on top of Golgotha or Calvary? 3 crosses. There were 3 beings crucified there, right? 3 that were 1. It's the 3 in 1. It's the same system. So the last paragraph of quoting Wilford here.
And real quick,
Yeah.
the nerve ganglia from like your eyeballs to your optic thalamus, it makes a crucifix and goes down your spine. So it's also, and for those who don't know, that optic thalamus, that's your third eye, allegedly. That's like your pineal gland.
Well, where I saw this clip of Mel Gibson was Marty played it at the Gnostic Academy, his Sunday service last week. And he also showed a photo of the back of your skull and how your skull has actual like plates that look like they're stitched together. It's not like one solid smooth piece. And in the back of the skull, there's these 2 lines or sutures that look like a triangle. Is a lambda. It's called like a lambda something, which is the Greek L. But he showed how the pineal gland, it actually, if you were to just like make that skull transparent but keep the triangle, and you're looking at it dead on from the back of someone's head, the pineal gland is like the eye at the top of this triangle shape, this pyramid shape of the skull. I was like, that is some really cool. That's something we don't get into a lot, but
Well, because then it gets into like the Great Seal symbolism and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's freaking sweet. I love how one of the things about this system that I don't think we necessarily cover enough, or it's just not in our current crosshairs, is how reflective it is, not just of nature and astrology, but the human body and anatomy. That's where it gets weird.
The only reason we don't get into it is because I haven't found it in the historical record of anybody like from long ago talking about it. It seems like a lot of this came onto the scene in like after the 1850s. Doesn't invalidate any of it and how cool it is. It just doesn't seem like that was the initial, but like, listen, if somebody can produce historical documents of somebody from the ancient world writing about that, then it just validates it.
Yeah, it might not be part of the original system, but it's the kind of mysticism that's cool. I think our job, or like what we try to do, is to help people let go of superstition. And that kind of mystical stuff, like the anatomy reflected in the mythology, I don't think that that's superstition. I think that's just like how the truth is always, how the fractality of, God the image of man and the universe all being similar. I think that's
Listen,
super cool.
I cut my teeth on like authors like Washington Carey, right? Like the Zodiac and the cell salts and all that stuff. Like all that stuff is interesting. Don't get me wrong. It's just modern.
So this last part where we're talking about Adam being entombed in a cave or a vault, according to the Muslims, called Al-Kanuz, in a mountain at the center of the world. Wilford writes, his descendants removed to that holy mountain, the wicked offspring of Cain were allowed only to dwell at the foot of it, whilst that of Seth were seated higher up, as far as the top, where they lived in great sanctity and purity of manners, every day worshiping God on the summit of the mountain, and visiting the body of Adam in his vault, as the means of procuring the divine blessing. This mountain in the center of the earth, with 7 steps or stories, or Mount Meru, was really the mountain of God, the worldly temple of the spirit of heaven, and the tomb of his son. Contis of Smyrna says that this holy mountain was depicted on the shield of Achilles, and that on its summit resided the efficacy or Shakti of the world, or of the supreme being, towering to the skies. And he adds that this most sacred place was very difficult of access. So I'll leave it up to you or myself in the future to track down some of the claims that he's making here. For those of us raised in modern Christianity, it's a pretty foreign concept to have a dogma regarding where Adam was buried, but the other Abrahamic religions have tons of writing about it. The cave or vault of Alkanuz that Wilford mentions here I can't find a specific reference to that, but the Arabic word al-Kanz means treasure in the context of like a hidden or guarded repository. And so think about al-Kanz, and in the modern context of banking, do the Cohens guard treasure? Is that treasure measured in currency, or is the real treasure the Shakti, or in Hebrew, Shekinah, which means the power or efficacy over the world, right? And is there a pyramid structure that the sons of Seth, or the priesthood essentially, they stay on top of this pyramid. They're in connection and communication with the body of God, essentially, the body of Adam, the skull. Think about all of the skull symbolism in the secret societies. Think about how they like to visit, or they like to get together in tombs, the skull and bones thing, all of that. The symbolism of the coffin in Freemasonry. We got to understand papal bulls and the triple crown of Baal to get a better look at this. So that's it for the free hour. That's just the warm up. We're not even really halfway done, not accounting for some of the
Let's
things Dylan
go.
has on deck. This is big stuff, guys. So if you want to join us in part 2, we're going to be following the money or following the debt. We're going to be looking at this pyramid and the triple crown of Baal, the papal bulls, the what else is on here? Ancient artifacts of the Etruscans, like the bulla. There's a lot more here. And I think at the end of it, we might even have a little more context to modern geopolitics of why have these Middle Eastern wars really been happening? What's the thing that is not being talked about much or by very many people, and definitely by no one else in the context that we are bringing to it in this episode? So join us over on the other side, my Patreon, Substack, or YouTube channel membership linked in the show notes, or Dylan, greattide.substack.com. And we are going to drop some serious gravy bombs, man. It's going to be legendary. This will be one that you keep coming back to.
Yeah, as also just think of that Bellator warrior. You have Bellus, Bella, Lord, and then Tor, the bull. So it's like literally like the bull god, the bull market, So there's either a recurring theme that is being rehashed, or it's all coincidence, and we're just all coincidence theorists. And maybe that's what it is, right? Like maybe there is a degree of pattern recognition / high IQ that you have that it actually becomes dangerous because you see patterns where they aren't. I don't know. We're going to get to the bottom of it either way, though.
unhinged.
At least I'm self-aware of it, right?
Yeah, well, most people's like schizo post of conspiracy theories, they don't have a whiteboard big enough to fit all of the coincidences that this whole Bell, Bail, Bull, Tor thing has got within it. Because we're talking spanning thousands of years. It's unreal.
See you on the other side, guys. Thanks for subscribing to us. We appreciate it.